Good morning, students. Welcome to the fourth module on costing. So, before we start, let me take you to the last class what we had discussed. So, we had started with the fourth module, that is costing systems and methods, wherein before we understand the concept, we had seen few videos. That is, one video was basically on the job costing in terms of how to make a cake. Next, we also had seen on how to make a cigarettes, which was basically on process costing. Then we also saw a video on orange juice manufacturing. So these videos would have really helped us to understand what is how the manufacturing of orange juice or cigarettes or the cake is been done. The basic intention of we watching the video was to get familiarized with the process that is involved in making up of these products. So with this video background, we started a discussion. This particular module basically covered on costing system and methods. So under the costing systems, we are going to understand what is unit and output costing. Then we also look into the job costing in terms of how the records are maintained, how the cost of a particular product is ascertained using this particular method. And the next we will be moving on towards allocation of overheads and its application. So then we move on to the contract costing, which is also part of a job costing. Then the distinction between job and contract costing, process costing, features and applications. Finally, service costing, features and application with respect to more specific towards transport industry. So we had already discussed about the background of this module in the last class, wherein we have learned about the different, based on the depending upon different industries in the businesses under which they are operating. So different companies or the businesses will be using different methods of costing. And these methods of costings are different for different industries as such. So whichever method of costing is available and whichever the industry feels is relevant for them, so they may adopt that particular method. The more on, even though the different methods may be available, but the basic principles of ascertaining happens to be the same. So it is now depends on companies as to which method they need to adopt and which method basically suits them. And accordingly, we have discussed there are basically two important methods, that is job costing and process costing. And in among these two methods only, the all other methods are integrated. So we also had looked into what is this unit costing or a single output costing as such, and wherein we learned like this method is basically used in manufacture of an identical product where the production run is on only on single product is manufactured, and all the cost which are applicable to manufacture that particular product is taken into consideration. So there the companies normally uses unit costing, and some of the examples that we have seen in terms of the beverages, cement works, steel, brick manufacturing or fluid mills. So in some of these industries they use what is known as the unit costing because the product is going to be one single product. And in order to ascertain what is the cost per unit of manufacturing a given product, so the cost sheet is basically prepared, and with the help of cost sheet the companies try to find out what is the cost to be incurring in manufacturing a given product. So this cost sheet is basically a document which is going to provide all the assembly of the detail of cost with regarding to the cost center or a cost unit. And this cost center can be a brick, manufacturing industry in case of brick, in case of a roti manufacturing industry, the one roti, what is the cost of preparing one roti. So if it is a candy ice cream manufacturing unit, then what is the cost of preparing one candy ice cream. So like this, depending upon what is the cost center under consideration, so the cost sheet is basically used. And this particular cost sheet is going to divide the entire component of manufacturing that particular product into a prime cost, factory cost, cost of production, cost of sales, and finally we end up with understanding what is cost per unit. So while preparing this particular cost sheet, we are going to exclude some of the items which are not going to be a part of this. That also we have looked into. It is clearly mentioned, like cash discount, interest paid, preliminary expenses written off, so transfers to reserves. So some of all these items which are mentioned here are not going to be a part of our cost sheet. So they are going to be a part of a profit and loss account while trying to find out what is the profit or loss that we made by running the business. So this is a kind of a cost sheet format that we will be using. So initially we used to have in a prime cost segment direct materials, direct labors and direct expenses, but later part this particular direct expenses is going to be a part of our what is known as the factory overheads. So in that particular segment only we are going to look into this one. So but for theoretical learning we still continue with the including these direct expenses under the head prime cost, and accordingly once we add up all the factory overheads to the prime cost, we get what is known as a works cost. For the works cost, when we add our administrative overheads, we get cost of production. And for the cost of production, once we do the adjustment with regarding to opening stock of finished goods, deducting the closing stock of finished goods, so finally we get what is known as cost of sales. Cost of goods sold. And for that cost of goods sold, once we add all the selling and distribution overheads, we get cost of sales. So the detailed description with regarding to the cost sheet is already we discussed in the last class. So you need to go through this particular format in detail so that you will be able to understand what all the component that comes in prime cost, factory overheads, so on and so forth. Then we had also discussed about the first method of costing, that was job costing. And as the name goes, the job costing, so this method is basically used in those industry where the business receives orders based as customized orders. Whenever a customer comes with some specific requirement to get a particular product done, so we normally use this particular job costing techniques. In case of bakery industries, the cakes. In case of tailoring shop, the tailor, the garment which the customer brings and he want a particular kind of design to be done on for a particular outfit, then again this particular technique is used. So the definition part goes in this manner. It is defined as a system of costing in which the element of cost are accumulated separately for each job and work undertaken by an organization. So as and when the customer specify what kind of requirement he wants, so accordingly the company start finding out what is the amount of cost that is required to be incurred for getting that work done, and based on that they are going to find out the cost per unit of manufacturing that particular product. So some of the units that are used in job costing are basically, it may be a unit, a batch, a sales order, a project contract, service, or specific program as such. So which means a company may be manufacturing a particular product as per the requirement. It may be just one unit the company may be manufacturing. For example, if in case of construction industry, if a client comes up with construction of an bungalow wherein that bungalow is exclusively having a specific requirement as specified by the customer, then it's a kind of a unit. A batch means basically a same kind of item which the customer specified to be manufactured in a huge quantity. For example, in case of Diwali, during Diwali time, if the customer says he want to give the gift to the guest who comes to his shop during Diwali for festival time, and accordingly want to get the particular gift packing done in a particular manner, some thousand quantities, so that become a kind of a batch. So in this way, depending upon what the requirement and consideration, so a job may be of any of these particular thing. Even it may be like a specific program, could be kind of a destination wedding, or it may be organizing a particular product launch for a company. So in such a situation, so companies try to adopt what is known as a job costing methodology. So some of the other details regarding to this particular technique being, so whenever a particular job is completed, then we normally try to find out what are the things that the company has incurred in order to do that particular job, and that includes material, direct labor and overheads. So this particular method is applicable in case of engineering concerns, construction companies, shipbuilding, furniture making, machine manufacturing industries, repair shops, automobile garages, etc. So every production order is basically assigned a number so that it is easy for them to track which order the people are working upon. So they give a job number, job order number, work order number in this particular manner, so that it is easy for them to track. So some of the features of job costing also were discussed. It's a specific order costing. Job is carried out or a product is produced to meet a specific requirement of an order. Job costing enables a business to ascertain the cost of a job on the basis of which quotations for a job may be given. So sometimes it may be required, like we need to give quotation before we get the order. So if a same kind of activity if the same kind of an activity if the company is once again doing without any change in any of the conditions or the specification as such, so based on the past experience they are going to quote the same with addition of some 10% 15% changes in the price. While computing the cost, the direct costs are charged to the job directly as they are traceable to the job, whereas the indirect expenses are charged to the job on some suitable basis, because identifying the direct cost or the direct material and direct labor is easier, whereas in case of indirect expenses, especially in job costing, it's very difficult. So in that case, normally the firms try to recover these overheads by charging a certain percentage of overhead to the job that they are doing. Each job complete may be different from the other jobs, therefore more detailed supervision and control is necessary. So if you look into this format, so this is a kind of an record that the company maintains for each job that they are undertaking. So here they mention about the number, the brief particulars, the date when the particular work started, when it was completed, and any remarks in case of any kind of there was breakdown of machinery or there was a delay in getting a material. So they can mention the reason as to what was the delay or any kind of a thing that they have encountered. And in case of here, they try to mention about what are the different materials they have used, so on which particular day the direct labors were working upon, and what is the cost incurred for doing that particular task. On the right hand side, if you observe, there is the total material, how much it is consumed, the wages the company has incurred. Then we also look into the factory overheads, how much is the factory overhead recovery done, and the administrative overheads. So depending upon the contribution of factory overheads and administrative overheads, the relative share, the percentage may vary, and that becomes the final total cost. So next we move on to what is known as the job ticket and job card. So for each job there should be some identification in terms of what the workers are supposed to do, and depending upon that, what is the kind of material they are supposed to be using and what is the operation they are supposed to be doing in terms of start and finish time. Hence this job ticket or job cards are basically used. So this will help the people who are working to reduce the idle time, and we also be very clear in terms of understanding as to what they're supposed to be doing on that particular product. And this also will help to link between the production control and costing. So we also had discussed about the concept of overheads, and why we need to study at this point of time the overheads, since in the job costing it is easy to understand how much is the relative share of direct material and direct labor, but when it comes to how much is the overhead share that is need to be recovered or assigned, so it's a bit difficult. So overheads, as the definition goes, it's aggregate of indirect material, indirect labor and indirect expenses which cannot be traced to individual product and services. So hence the first and foremost thing what the companies are going to do is they are going to departmentalize, or what is known as the primary distribution of overheads is going to be done, and hence the entire plant is going to be divided into different segments in the form of departments. Based on that, what is the relative share of each of these departments, so through which they try to apportion or they try to allocate that particular overheads and assign to the product. So the concept of allocation of overhead is something of this kind. So when the whole item of the overheads, if we are able to assign to the cost center, then we say it is an allocation of overheads. So for example, in case the supervision charges or the overtime work that is done in a particular department, so if we are able to assign this entire cost to a particular product, then it is called as an allocation. But the allocation of apportionment of overheads, when we look into, so when it is not possible to identify what is the relative share of these overheads to the cost center, then we use what is known as apportionment of overheads. So under this apportionment of overheads, we try to use some basis in terms of how to allocate the power, lighting, rent. So using the proper basis, we try to apportion the overheads. Once this apportionment is been done, so in case if your apportionment is done to the production department, service department, then we also go for what is known as reapportionment of overheads. It means whatever overheads are apportioned to the service department, so from there again it is apportioned back to the production department. So that is called as a reapportionment of overheads. So some of the easy way of understanding what is allocation and what is apportionment is direct versus indirect identification, whole versus part. So we also looked into the purpose of allocation of a cost. So why the allocation of costing is necessary. So some of these points we have discussed. So I am going to move to the next aspect. We also had looked into what are the different ways of allocating the overheads. So first and foremost is to create what is known as the cost pools, and once the cost pools are created, then from there we go for allocating the cost from cost pool to the individual jobs. These are some of the different service departments, and the basis of apportionment is being used. So depending upon which is the best way of apportionment the company feels, they can use it and apportion the service department cost. So when we speak about the different methods of apportionment of cost from one department to another department, so again there are basically the service department is categorized into two. One is apportionment to production as well as service department. Apportionment to production department only. Sorry. So apportionment to production as well as service department. Here we have again two methods. One is non-reciprocal and reciprocal basis. So under reciprocal basis, again we are having three different methods, which we had seen in the last class. So under the simultaneous equation method, repeated distribution method, and trial and error method. No doubt there are all these are three different methods, but finally the relative share of each of the service department when it is reapportioned back to production department, the value should remain the same. So this was an example which I taken in the last class in terms of how the overheads which is allocated to production department and service department are reapportioned back to the production department using these three different methods. And when you see at the end, in each of the methods, the final overhead rate per hour is going to remain the same. So next, let's continue from here. So the next type of method of costing is called as a contract costing. All of us are familiar with this term called contract. So basically the word contract, whenever we hear, maybe when you take a simple example, if you want to get some whitewashing of a building, then we try to think whether we should go for square feet basis of paying or whether we should go for contract. What is contract? It's kind of we think like we want to give a lump sum payment for the entire house painting. So we also stipulate the time period. Within 15 days we want the entire house to be completed or painting to be completed. So similarly, when we want to construct a house and it is very difficult for us to supervise or get the materials and keep a track of fluctuation in the prices of the materials, so we normally seek the help of an engineer and we ask him what is the contract price of getting the 2 BHK house constructed, and accordingly he is going to specify a per square feet construction cost. So a contract costing is also a kind of form of application of principles of job order costing. So under this method, each contract is treated as a cost unit and the costs are certain separately for each contract. And this method is basically suitable in case of businesses which are concerned with building or engineering projects or structural or construction contracts, because these kind of works are not going to be just completed in a day or so. It may run into few months or sometimes may runs into years together. So for that reason, the company which undertakes this contract works, they will be maintaining what is known as a separate account for each of the contracts, because each contract may differ in terms of a specification, in terms of the material that is used, in terms of the direct labor cost and other overheads as such. Hence it becomes necessary for them to understand what is the cost they are incurring for completing each unit of the contract. So the contract account is basically debited with all the direct and indirect expenditure incurred in relation to the contract. It is also credited with the amount of contract price on completion of the contract. Since the profit and loss is ascertained based on what is the contract value and how much the cost the contractor has incurred, and that becomes a reference for them to understand whether they made a profit by undertaking the contract work or they may incur a loss. And this particular thing is going to be transferred to profit and loss account. Now a point of difference we need to understand between what is this job costing and contract costing. When you look into the job costing, so under the job costing, the cost is first allocated to cost centers and then to individual jobs. Whereas in case of contract costing, most of the expenses are being in the direct nature, and hence the overheads are going to forming only a small percentage of total expenditure, because these contract costs are going to be the contract works are going to be done in the customer premises, or the contractor is going to do a job not in his own factory unit, but is going to do it separately, or is going to do it in a particular location where he's supposed to take all the resources and then do the work. Whereas in case of job costing, so most of the works are going to be done within the premises, hence the share of relative overheads is going to be slightly more. So these are the point of differences which makes what job costing and contract costing to differ. The next method of costing we need to understand is process costing. So before we move on to understand what is process costing, let's also see a video. So this particular video is basically on mastic manufacturing.
It's thought that fire was first used by primitive man up to 1.7 million years ago. However, starting a fire with basic flint or rubber sticks together is a really difficult process. But things got right in the 5th century when the Chinese invented sulfur engines. It wasn't until the mid-19th century that the civil engine Hubli.
Okay, the very purpose of again we see this particular video is to understand how a matchbox is manufactured. Normally we use this matchbox in our day-to-day life. In that case, we never thought like how exactly the production of this matchbox are being done. Now, having gone through this particular video, now we can clearly understand that it is not just one small process as such. It undergoes several stages. So, a process costing is a form of operation costing which is used where standardized homogeneous products are produced. And in case of matchbox, if you observe, all the products are identical, the matchsticks are identical, the product is identical in all the forms. So this costing method is useful in industries like chemicals, textile, steel, rubber, shoes, then sugar and petrol industries. Process costing is also used in the assembly type of industries also. In case of a car manufacturing industry or automobile manufacturing industries, hence so we can understand like it is basically whenever a particular product has to undergo a series of processes, then obviously it becomes necessary that we need to use process costing technique. So in the process costing, it is assumed that the average cost represents the cost per unit, because tracking what is the cost for manufacturing each product is practically difficult. Hence we first try to accumulate the total cost for manufacturing the given product and dividing by the total number of units that are manufactured in a particular lot will help us to ascertain the cost per unit. The cost of production during a particular period is also divided by the number of units produced during that period to arrive at a cost per unit. So in this way we try to find out what is the cost per unit under the process costing. So moving on with the meaning of process costing. Process costing is a method of costing under which all the costs are accumulated for each stage of production or process, and the cost per unit of product is ascertained at each stage of production by dividing the cost of each process by the normal output of that particular process. So the definition looks bit kind of complex, but in a simple words, if a particular product is undergoing different processes, at each process there may be an addition of direct material, labor, and the output of each process. So there may be a set of some amount of loss, and having taken into consideration those losses, so what is the normal output or what is the actual output that the process has given out? So this becomes the input for the next process. In this way, when we keep moving from one process to another process, so what is the normal output at each of these processes, that is taken as a basis to find out the cost. The features of process costing. This method of costing is basically used in those industries where the production is continuous, production is homogeneous, the process is standardized. So you can just now understand in case of pharmaceutical industries, in case of shoe manufacturing, in case of now the orange juice manufacturing industries, or it may be mastic industry. So normally we can see the application of this process costing. Output of one process becomes the raw material for another process. The output of the last process is transferred to the finished stock. The costs are collected process wise. It is not necessary that once the input of raw material is done in first process, only in the end, at the last process only, the output is going to be forming. Sometimes after the 2 or 3 processes, there may be a split in terms of the after the third process. Example, the product when it is turned out, okay, some portion may be transferred to the next process, whereas some certain portion of product may be taken out, and that itself becomes a finished product to sell into the market. So depending upon what is the output in a given process, so the firm can decide whether it need to be processed for next further few stages, or can they use a particular output and sell it out. So under this particular method, again both direct and indirect costs are accumulated in each process, and if there is a stock of semi-finished goods, it is expressed in terms of equivalent units. So this basically happens when we are reporting at the end of the year. So we need to report what is the stock of inventory. At that time, these semi-finished goods are calculated in terms of the number of equivalent units and reported for financial reporting purpose. The total cost of each process is divided by the normal output of that process to find out the cost per unit of that particular process. So these are some of the features of the process costing. Now when you look into the application of this process costing, again where we are going to use this particular process costing. So this method is basically used in those industries where the product is identical. So the industries has multiple departments where the product has to move from one department to another department. If you take the example of again a helmet manufacturing business, the helmet before it is comes into finished staged form, so it has to move from one department to another department, from molding department to paint department, from there to assembly department, so on and so forth. So industries with interchangeable parts. So when I speak about industries with interchangeable parts, so basically a product which is manufactured, and if it gets worn out, so obviously you need to be replaced with a different part as such. In such case, so again you can use particular process costing techniques. Industry with varying product features. So if you take example of a computer or mobile manufacturing industry, mobile as such, so here also the product will come with a variety of features. Every now and then when some R&D work is going on and company comes up with some new features to be introduced, they try to incorporate it, and as such then again the process costing is going to be used. Similarly, case maybe in terms of AC or washing machine, or it may be in case of television manufacturing industry. So in all these cases the process costing techniques is used. And finally it is in innovative industries. There are companies which keeps coming up with trying to experiment with innovative products, and as such they also will be using these process costing techniques. Now this is the format for maintaining the process account. So on the left hand side it's a simple ledger account kind of a thing, where we divide this into two parts. The left side is meant for recording the debit aspect, and the right side is meant for recording the credit aspect. So the left side is basically meant to record the raw materials, the basic materials, the direct materials, the labors, the direct expenses, the production overheads, the cost of rectifying the defective material if any, and the abnormal gain. So here at each process, like if there are three process, means when a particular product is moving from one process to next process, so at each process this kind of data is going to be maintained. If it is a process 1, then process 1 account. If it is process 2 account. In this manner the recording is going to be maintained. On the right hand side if you see, so we have here something called as by normal loss. So depending upon the kind of a product under consideration, the product may be having a normal loss. If the nature of the product is evaporating in nature, or the product is of oil extracting business, so there may be some amount of normal loss by and large, which is quite common. And there is also something as abnormal loss. Sometimes because of the reckless handling or carelessness on the part of the workers, or because of negligence, so you may end up with the abnormal loss. So these normal loss and abnormal loss, both the things are need to be taken into consideration, and having captured both the things, then we can find out what is the output which need to be transferred to the next process. So in this manner, when the particular products keep moving from one process to next process, finally when it comes to last process, so the product is going to be transferred to finished stock account. Now, what is normal loss and how we are going to capture the value of this normal loss? So a normal loss is an unavoidable loss which occurs due to the inherent nature of the material and the production process under normal conditions, which means the nature of the product itself is so that by default we will be incurring this normal loss as such. So in case of, let's take a papad manufacturing industry, so a wastage, a kind of normal loss maybe in terms of evaporating, or certain amount of raw material may get wasted. So by default it is normally estimated on the basis of past experience of the industries. It may be in the form of normal wastage or normal scrap or normal spoilage and normal defectiveness. So hence when it's a part of nature of a product itself, so in that case, so normal loss is bound to be prevailing. And in order to calculate what is a normal loss per unit, we use this particular formula. So the total cost minus the scrap value of the units, in case if there is any scrap value, divided by what was the input quantity minus the normal loss quantity. By doing so, we will come to know what is the cost of good units, and this cost of good unit is going to be taken as a basis for a computation purpose. Similarly, when we speak about abnormal loss, any loss which is caused by unexpected abnormal conditions such as plant breakdown, substandard material, carelessness, accident, such losses are in excess of predetermined normal losses. Normally this may be happening in case if the workers are not careful while handling the material, or sometime because of a hurry-burry nature, or because the kind of material that they use itself is a substandard. In case of construction industry, wherein the kind of cement or the sand that they are supposed to use while constructing, if they compromise on the quality aspect of the cement and the sand, or if it doesn't mix in a proper ratio between the cement and stone while constructing, so that may leads into collapse of a wall or a structure as such. So this loss is basically an avoidable loss. This abnormal loss arrives when actual loss are more than the expected loss. So in order to compute the value of this abnormal loss, so from the total cost we are going to minus the scrap value of normal loss, in case if it is any, divided by input units minus normal loss in units. This is multiplied with the number of abnormal loss units. So this is the abnormal loss account which we need to maintain, and on the debit side if you see, abnormal loss account is debited with the process account, and this account, in case if we are realizing any amount of scrap by selling this abnormal loss units, so by bank account is written and how many units are sold and what is the value realized is mentioned, and finally the closing balance is transferred to costing profit and loss account. This another interesting that we come across is abnormal gain. So what is this abnormal gain as such? In case if the actual loss is less than the normal loss, then it is called as abnormal gain. So the value of this abnormal gain is calculated in similar manner as abnormal loss. So now the question is, when can this abnormal gain is going to happen? So in case if we estimate the normal loss by the normal loss in any case is going to be a 10%. But in case if the workers conduct the work in a way it is required and a proper care is taken, and due to which, so if the normal loss instead of 10%, if it is reduced to less than 10%, and that may leads to generating more output than it is required, then expected, then it is expected, then we may say it is on account, we say it's a abnormal gain as such. So the sale value of these abnormal gains units are transferred to normal loss account, and the difference is transferred to costing profit and loss account as a real gain. So the account is maintained in this manner. Abnormal gain account, on the debit side we have two normal loss account, and on the credit side, so since it's a gain, so on the credit side we mentioned it's a process account, whether it's the first process, second process, third process. So in whichever process the abnormal gain has happened, the name of that particular process account is mentioned, and the difference is transferred to costing profit and loss account. So moving on with next is about the service costing. So as the word goes, service costing, this method of costing is applicable or used in those industries which are basically service oriented, where they are practically not selling any product but they are rendering a service. So in order to ascertain what is the cost of rendering the service, so we adopt what is known as service costing techniques. So some of the examples of industries where this method is used is basically like transport industries, water supply, electricity, hospitals, so hotels. So in some of these industries, so the service happens to be the key ingredients, and hence so service costing technique is widely used. Service costing is just a variant of unit or output costing, and hence the service costs are collected periodically like the process cost. The cost of rendering a service for a particular product is related to the quantum of service rendered during the particular period to arrive at a cost per unit of service rendered. Which means normally when we get an electricity bill, we say what is the total unit consumed, and accordingly what is the cost per unit of electricity we look into the bill. So when it's a rainy season, then obviously the electricity department doesn't hike the prices, but when there is a shortfall of rain and when the drought condition occurs, then in that case the electricity board will announce the hike in price per unit of the electric current. And normally the reason being, it is based on what is the cost they will be incurring to generate per unit of current, so that is going to be taken as a basis to increase the prices. Similarly, whenever the diesel prices rises, so the transport industries, especially the public transport industry, so they also will hike the price of tickets. And when we look into the reason why it is so, it may be basically because of the hike in the petrol price, the diesel price. And accordingly, when there are a lot of tolls that are there between the two different locations, and if a particular vehicle has to move from 8 to 10 tolls and they need to pay a toll charges, then obviously that is also going to be adding to a cost to them. So looking to all these aspects, so the costs are going to be taken into consideration, and then we are going to calculate what is the cost per unit of rendering a service. So some of the features of service costing: the undertaking which adopts service costing does not produce any tangible goods. So the expenses are basically divided into fixed and variable cost, and this particular classification is necessary in order to ascertain the cost of service and the unit cost of a service, because the fixed cost is going to remain fixed, whereas the variable cost is going to vary as the volume is going to increases. So hence the cost unit may be simple or a composite cost. So again, under this method of costing, the costs are usually computed period wise, and the service costing can be used for service performed internally or externally. There will be certain departments in the company which will be only rendering a service, and hence the cost of rendering the service internally also is going to be ascertained. And in case if they are rendering the same service to the external, then what is the cost of rendering a service to the external people also is going to be computed accordingly. So in order to do this, the companies will be maintaining what is known as a daily log sheet or a cost sheet for collection of the cost data. So when it comes to the application of service costing, service cost is useful in determining the cost of providing a service, and this is going to become a basis for ascertaining the price of services. And when it comes to transport industry or hotel industry or electricity companies, so service costing is basically widely used in transport industries, because in transport undertakings the cost unit is normally in terms of whether it is a ton per kilometer or a passenger per kilometer, and accordingly depending upon what kind of transport undertaking they are, whether they are into a goods carrying industry or passenger carrying industry, the unit of measurement is going to be taken accordingly and the costing is going to be done. So the composition of the total cost in this industry, if you look into, it is classified into three. One is the standing charges, the running charges, and the maintenance charges. Standing charges basically in case if the transport industry doesn't get any orders, then obviously the vehicles need to be incurring what is known as the standing charges, because unless there is orders, or unless the if it is a passenger industry, once they get the passengers, then only they will be able to move the vehicles. So the running charges is the amount of time the vehicle is moving. So they also be incurring what is known as running charges, some driver's salary, fuel cost, the toll charges as such. And the maintenance charges is basically in terms of the repairs and maintenance, upkeeping of vehicles, and some amount of the internal maintenance in terms of some brakes and other component which are having any damage, so it need to be repaired. So the vehicle running cost sheet is going to be used to determine the cost per kilometer or the cost per ton once a vehicle is actually on the task. So in a nutshell, so what did we learn from this particular module is the different methods of costing. So starting from the unit or output costing, job costing, process costing, contract costing, then the service costing, and in particularly the allocation of overheads and its application. So we will be solving problems on each on job costing, unit costing, and process costing. So in the next video of mine, so I'll be showing you how we are going to solve the problems on unit costing using cost sheet. So I'll be sharing you the problems through mail, or I'll be uploading it on the EIS, so people can download the problems, and I'll be sharing the video step-by-step approach in solving the problems on all these different methods. Thank you.